Hello, I'm David R. Jones of the Community Service Society. Welcome to the Urban Agenda. I'm honored to be joined by Fernando Ferrer, a longtime friend, the former Bronx Borough President, City Councilman, and of course, candidate for mayor. His leadership during the past 25 years has improved the lives of millions of New Yorkers. Welcome to the Urban Agenda.
Glad to be here, and thank you very much for what you just said, David.
Well, you're leading a new institution, or an institution that's been there, Drum Major. Can you tell our viewers something about how it operates, what you're doing with it?
Sure. It was founded in 1961 by the New York members of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Its principal founder was Martin Luther King's lawyer, Harry Wachtel. I was asked to join it at the end of my service in government, and asked to consider a lot of other offers too after I got out of government. But this is the one that attracted me most, because it was an opportunity to turn it into an institute that examined public policy issues as they relate to social and economic fairness, things that I've dedicated more than 25 years of political and governmental life to.
Well, I know our viewers are interested in how you see the city going. What is your general sense? Are we going in the right direction? What would you change? Where do you see the engagement?
If I had to pick one symbol phrase that it sort of says it all for me, it's Bush standing in front of a camera saying, "Honey, I shrunk the middle class," because that's precisely what he has done across this nation, but more particularly in New York. Now that's bad news for the middle class that shrinks off the plateau, worse news for the near poor and the poor, because they no longer have pathways into the middle class. Bad federal policies, bad state policies, and city policies that merely exacerbate those problems have meant that more people are jobless, more families are homeless, and more New Yorkers are finding themselves running out of hope and opportunity. That's very bad for the dynamism of the city, and certainly the dynamism of a middle class that has been the mainstay of economic and social well-being in New York.
Now, what should the city be doing? We obviously have an administration which I think most of us see as more gentle and kind, but what should this Bloomberg administration be doing to address the problems of the middle class and the working poor?
Well, first of all, David, I think you've correctly pointed out that this administration appears to be more gentle and more kind, certainly than the one that preceded it. Sure. But then, of course, anybody who doesn't snarl while administering government would seem to be a welcome relief from the 8 years that preceded it. That having been said, we still have enormous problems with finding affordable housing in this city, with sanitation, with finding a job in this city, with the whole idea of this city being an engine for economic growth. In fact, small business is declining, jobs are declining, even though we're getting slight upticks here and there. People are finding it more difficult to get health insurance for themselves and for their children. These are all indicators that something is going very, very wrong in the social and economic fabric of New York.
We've been looking, obviously, at the problem particularly of chronic unemployment. Unemployment rate for New York City hovers around 9%, leading the nation.
That's a huge number.
But for African Americans and Latinos, obviously, the numbers become staggering. What do you see as this administration's response, and what do you think they should be doing about these kinds of problems? Obviously, we've lost low-skilled and unskilled jobs, but is there something this city could do, even in these kinds of fiscal times of scarcity?
Well, we've got to build on areas of our strength. For example, healthcare is still a strength of this city. That's an industry in and of itself. We've got to be able to prepare people for jobs in that industry instead of providing jobs for those who live outside of the limits of this city and who can't and won't contribute to the wealth of this city, the well-being of this city, and contribute to providing services for this city. Another example of that is our failure to have a small business policy that focuses the city's efforts in tax incentive programs on growing small businesses, maintaining small businesses, and especially manufacturing jobs, those that require few skills, doesn't require a college degree, but gives people a pathway into the world of work and into the middle class.
I mean, one of the things that obviously the mayor is talking about, and I think everyone sort of applauds the idea, is clearly a systemic reform of public education. That clearly is one of the principal barriers to particularly poor children from making it. First of all, what is your take on this reform and where it's going, and how would you see the mayor change or do more of things he's attempting?
Well, I happen to agree with his administrative restructuring of what he calls now the Department of Education. I believe in accountability. I believe in standards, especially for teachers and administrators, most especially for politicians who manage these systems. Accountability to students, but most of all to the principal customers of public education, parents who send their kids to schools and have high expectations of these schools, their teachers, and their educational leaders. So as far as that goes, I think the mayor is moving in the right direction. I think, to be fair, we've got to give him the presumption that given this sea change in the way we manage public education in New York, the presumption that he's moving in the right direction until we see hard evidence otherwise. But there's another aspect to it, and that's curriculum. And that takes, as you know, David, a much longer time to evaluate with respect to effectiveness. For example, just this past summer, we saw the fourth grade scores on the writing part of the English language arts exam. And everybody marveled at the increase in the fourth grade numbers.
Right.
Kids are learning to write better. But that was a change in curriculum that was begun 10 years ago.
It takes that long.
It takes that long to train teachers, to establish curriculum, to have it grow, to get the right textbooks, and of course to do something about classroom overcrowding, certified teachers, and all the other things that make this meaningful.
It's interesting. It gets right to a point. I had a short exchange with Mayor Bloomberg, and one of those questions just emerged, how long this takes to really get down to seeing achievable results. The worry becomes, even if you make reform, and it takes, what about the young people who are already still in the system, either in the latter part of junior high school or in high school? What opportunities are we going to give them, since everyone's now admitted these youngsters have been failed. But they're coming into the workforce in incredible numbers, and they're tens of thousands, and obviously a low-wage workforce that doesn't have very much room for people with limited skills. What would you address if we had sort of a magic wand to waive those cohorts of kids who are coming out, haven't gotten a chance to experience the benefits of the reform, who are now coming into the workforce? What do we do for these young people who are coming out?
Well, that formulation is right. Not only does it have little room for them, it has negative room for them. It's pushing them out. It's going to take a long time to implement the kinds of changes that we're going to need to see. But not a moment can be wasted in doing this. That having been said, there has to be a way to catch kids who fall out of the system. While all these things are happening, the administrative restructuring, the curriculum change, we still have the most alarmingly high dropout rate from high schools and even junior high schools in our system. We've got to be able to catch these kids. We've got to be able to provide smaller, more nurturing, and more intensively rigorous environments for them so that they can get a legitimate high school education. They can go to college if that is what they desire to do, or get a job. And we have to begin to look at how we manage our high schools. For example, not every child wishes to go to college. In fact, jobs in skilled trades, for example, electricians, plumbers, carpenters, go begging in this city because we're not producing enough candidates to take those jobs. And when you realize that a starting electrician can make $65,000 a year, well, this is an opportunity for a young person in New York to support him or herself and his or her family.
But it's interesting, you meet with the heads of the Carpenters Union who, in our times, I was stunned to see that the construction trades now were actively soliciting African American and Latino kids. I mean, there is a sea change going on. They were talking about the mathematic requirements before they can take a kid as a journeyman and as somebody into their programs, and finding that many of the youngsters coming out of our high schools don't even have those minimal sort of mathematical skills necessary to be a first-rate carpenter. And I don't see how that can happen. I do understand that we've been teaching math for consumers now to many kids and not particularly preparing them, just sort of shuffling them along. But you'd think that with an intense focus on that, we could at least start linking up with the trade opportunities that are available as it is. I'm still stunned that we haven't moved that.
Well, and now I'm going to say something that most people consider politically incorrect. I think we've got to revisit the whole idea of high schools that focus on trades. Vocational high schools, they used to be called.
Yep.
But to provide the kind of skills that kids need to get a good union job, a union card, and to participate fully in the economy and society of New York.
Well, you understand, I think, in our generation, the notion, and every Black and Latino child that at one point, either he or she or their parents had to fight the school's effort to put us into voc ed.
That's right.
And because this was, look at your color, look at your last name, straight to it.
But voc ed, as you know, was teaching obsolete skills
Right.
even then, leading to dead-end jobs even then. What I'm talking about is something very different. Something that teaches up to standards, something that has a guaranteed job at the end of the road, that teaches you how to be a card-carrying union member of the electricians union, plumbers union, carpenters union, and so many others.
I think I remember I served on the board of something called Jobs for the Future for many years. And they were going over the European system of apprenticeship is totally different in both its conception than ours. But clearly, now we're dealing with so many tens of thousands of youngsters who have not a prayer of getting anything more than McDonald's jobs. The waste here of opportunity becomes really extraordinary.
And they're part-time jobs, carrying no health benefits,
Right.
frequently at minimum wage, which means you have no shot to earn a living wage to be able to support yourself and your family.
We'll be right back to continue the urban agenda.
Are your kids getting enough art? Whether through poetry, dance, music, or drama, the arts open the doors to creativity. As a mother and teacher, I know that arts education can help our children develop confidence and a better understanding of the world around them. Even if you have just 30 minutes a week, get your kids more involved in the arts and think about the kind of world we can leave behind for our children and our children's children.
Art. Ask for more. AmericansForTheArts.org.
We're talking with Fernando Ferrer, who serves currently as president of the Drum Major Institute, a progressive think tank dedicated to economic and social justice. And talking about Drum Major, you've just commissioned and executed a major survey of the middle class in the city of New York. What were the findings? First of all, what prompted you to look?
It's an area, the shrinking middle class, the besieged middle class, the progressives have for too long ignored. And they ignored it really at their own peril. One, marginalizing issues and movements, but also forgetting that the middle class is always a pathway for the poor to become full participants in the economic and social life of this or any other city in America. And cities are very important to nurturing middle classes, and middle classes in turn are very important with respect to strengthening the fabric of cities. We undertook a survey, asked people to identify themselves. How do you identify yourself? And it's amazing that better than 90%, regardless of the fine distinctions of income level, define themselves as middle class, whether they are in strict terms or not. The second interesting finding was, for the most part, they felt economically secure. And then when you scratch the surface with underbelly questions, are you worrying about housing? We found an extraordinary number, a clear majority, worry about their ability to keep a roof over their heads. Do you worry about your job? an extraordinary number, a majority, worry about their job. Do you worry about health care? Again, a clear majority. There is an enormous amount of economic insecurity. The middle class knows it's shrinking. They know somebody who has lost a job. They know somebody who is unable to provide for affordable health care for themselves and their families. They know somebody who has stopped looking for work because it's been so long that they've been out of work. And they know that unless there's a way out, they're in deep economic trouble. Those who can still provide for themselves are saying, I'm finding it difficult to manage in this city. I've got to beat it out of here. I get emails from, since we did this study, from a New York City detective, retired, lives in Staten Island, says, I've got 2 pensions. I've got to leave because I can't support myself and my wife. He's got to leave. A New York City detective, retired, living in this city. Isn't that somebody we want to keep here? On the subway, I bump into an African-American woman who tells me, I'm moving to North Carolina. I cannot stay here anymore. I can't afford it anymore. I work hard, and I can't do it. I can't raise my children in this environment. It's just costing too much. I can't provide for them. I've got to go. Isn't that someone we want to keep in this city? Someone who's part of the middle class, someone who contributes positively to economic and social life in this city? We should be trying harder to keep them here.
It raises an interesting question that we've been working on quite a bit at CSS, which is the issue of after 9/11, there were all sorts of resources that were coming in. One of the more extensive was a Liberty bond pool, which was supposed to help rebuild residential housing and businesses. It's a subsidized bonding approach. For the first time in history, the sort of balance that has to be with almost every affordable housing program, which means you can have certain things at market, but you always have to have moderate and low included, was basically given up on. There is no affordable housing in that enormous amount, hundreds of millions of dollars in bonding authority. It's all going to upper end, not super luxury. It's not even upper income. I was stunned at some of the rentals, but it talk about not being in the realm of a fireman who had fought or died in the World Trade Center. It wasn't even in the realm of a doctor. These were the super wealthy being served.
You mean, David,
with a subsidy.
We're using taxpayer dollars to subsidize the construction of luxury housing
That everyone wants to get in.
In the wake of the worst domestic tragedy we have ever experienced as Americans?
Exactly.
This is a reflection of a federal policy that has shrunk the middle class, and it uses their money to enrich the already wealthy, a state policy that does precisely the same in the administration of these bonds, and a city policy that just sits by and lets it all happen.
You know, the fact that I can understand, I've been in politics and around politics for virtually my entire life. And the discussion you have with many policymakers within the administration is, well, there's nothing we can do about it. We don't have the power. But the notion of at least standing there and saying this is outrageous, and not hearing sort of people saying we have to alert the public that these kinds of abuses are unacceptable, particularly in a city where literally no teacher, no fireman, no policeman who tried to save people at the World Trade Center could make any use of any of these subsidies. It was all going to the super wealthy.
I might find that credible if, for example, Governor Pataki did not sponsor a fundraiser for one of the enemies of this city, Tom DeLay. No, he sponsored a fundraiser for him. He is helping someone whose policy and aim it is to hurt this city economically. Give me a break. That's just not credible.
Let's talk a little bit about affordable housing. Obviously, the mayor has come up with a program, to his credit, to deal with the affordable housing crisis. What is your take on it? First, of the program he's proposed, and what you think should be added or done differently?
It is an interesting program, as I understand it, as I understand the reports in the media. I don't completely understand how he will finance the program, and as you know, I understand on, as much or more than a whole lot of people in that, having worked with Ed Koch to rebuild housing in the part of the city that I represented for nearly 15 years, and working with virtually every housing commissioner from Tony Glideman on down in order to do that. And having authored legislation when I was in the council to accomplish that as well. So I don't completely understand the financing mechanism that the mayor proposes, but even more fundamentally, I haven't seen any of that housing that he has proposed in the pipeline for construction. That is troubling to me, because I remember Ed Koch's $5 billion 10-year housing plan, as you do. You were part of that administration. He will argue, Ed Koch, that his signal achievement was something else. I think his signature achievement for this city was providing for affordable housing and changing people's lives in a very material way. Rental housing, housing for the homeless, and ownership housing. I don't see much of that here. And if we just stop talking about it and start doing it, we can begin to grow this economy again by bringing more participants into the working class and in turn into the middle class.
You know, the other thing that's come out, obviously, the mayor has sort of made some real pushes in certain areas. I think we all watched, obviously, on the attempt to get the Olympics, which may be there, here nor there. But the other thing he's invested a lot of political capital in is trying to get past a bill or a charter revision calling for nonpartisan political elections. What is your take on that?
Well, he originally started calling for nonpartisan elections, and then he started calling for something, I think, after having read a New York Times poll that showed that his proposal didn't pass the laugh test, to something else where political identification would be optional. Look, David, this is to me at least, this is very clear. I read the New York Times in June of 2001, and I read the report that he went to the Independence Party convention, made a promise to Lenora Fulani that Lenora Fulani of all people, that if they gave him the line, he would push for nonpartisan elections. Now, I think it's admirable that any politician would seek to keep his word on a promise made. But I think this was an ill-advised promise, and using the machinery of government, not to change people's minds, because you accept the verdict of the people as you are a contestant in a democratic election, but change the rules to suit yourself is extraordinary. And I think people will see right through that.
You know, it's interesting. I've joined with a group of others, both educators and the rest, calling for smaller class sizes. I'm vice chair of a group that sought to get another charter provision on. And in this case, we collected over 114,000 and counting signatures.
And you were preempted from getting the matter on the ballot.
You know, I guess my concern is not the preemption. To deal with a matter of 114,000 people being obviously concerned about educational quality, and to brush it off on a procedural basis is, I don't think, appropriate.
Are you saying that these 100,000 signatories on a petition were disenfranchised?
I think that would be fair to say. There's no question that I started out as a corporate lawyer, and sometimes you win on process, but you lose the spirit of what's being intended, and that's the kind of feeling here.
Well, the interesting thing is that the proponents of the mayor's and Fulani's charter change assert that all these people who registered to vote as members of other parties are being disenfranchised because they can't vote in the Democratic Party primary. So they want to abolish these primaries. And now they disenfranchise 100,000 signatories who want to see an item on the ballot with a snap of a finger.
Well, I think this is a perfect segue into the question all the viewers have of you. Are you going to be running for mayor?
I will not mislead you. After having spent 25 years in public life, 20 of them in elected public office, I think about it an awful lot. I think about the opportunity to make choices. I'm not thinking about it right now, but I am thinking about it. I don't think I'm prepared to make a definitive statement one way or another right now, and that's because I just haven't given it the deep thought that it requires.
My thanks to Fernando Ferrer, truly an accomplished leader in addressing the needs of poor people and people across the spectrum in New York City. I'm David R. Jones of the Community Service Society, and thank you for watching the Urban Agenda. To learn more about the work of the Community Service Society of New York, or to comment on the Urban Agenda, please contact us at 212-614-5425 and on the web at www.cssny.org.